He looked at her hand in his and knew the moment could not be undone. A promise spoken in childhood had traveled through fire and ruin to arrive at this point, and now it was not a matter of honor alone but a choice. She had chosen to find him, to stand beside him, and to keep a vow that had shaped her life. He chose to accept, not because of obligation, but because he could finally see in her eyes the same unyielding light that had once carried him through battle. What began as an ember in his memory now flared into something greater, a reason to live beyond survival, beyond duty. Their bond deepened with each passing day. He discovered that beneath her resolve there was warmth, wit, and a fierce joy in simply existing. She discovered that beneath his scars and weariness there was gentleness and an unspoken longing for peace. Together they navigated the strange path of two lives joined not by chance, but by faith in words spoken long ago. For the soldier, it was as if the universe had finally offered him a reprieve, a chance to mend what war had broken. For her, it was a fulfillment of a destiny she had carried in her heart for over a decade. Their union stirred reactions across the fragile peace of the border worlds. Many among her people whispered disapproval, insisting she had tied herself to a broken relic of a foreign species. Some among the humans questioned why a decorated soldier would bind himself to someone so different, fearing scandal or misunderstanding. Yet the two of them paid no heed. They stood together, unshaken, proving by their presence that promises meant more than prejudice. Where others saw impossibility, they lived possibility. Where others saw division, they embodied unity. In that, they became more than individuals. They became a living testament to the belief that humanity's strength was its ability to inspire connection. He thought often about the meaning of vows. Soldiers made promises all the time, to follow orders, to protect comrades, to defend nations. Most of those promises broke in the chaos of war, not from betrayal, but from the sheer weight of survival. Yet this one promise, spoken by a child and accepted in kindness, had endured. It humbled him to realize that in all his years of fighting, it was not victory or defeat that mattered most, but a small act of compassion that had changed two lives. It reminded him that humanity's greatest victories were not measured in conquered worlds, but in the hearts it touched. When they finally stood before their communities to formalize their bond, it was not a grand ceremony of pomp or spectacle. It was simple, solemn, and profound. His people and hers gathered, some with skepticism, others with quiet wonder. She spoke first, declaring in her own language that her vow had been fulfilled. He answered in hers, his accent imperfect, but his intent clear, promising not only his life but his heart. When they joined hands, silence filled the hall, and in that silence all present felt something shift. It was not merely a union of two souls, but a bridge across species, a promise kept across impossible odds. For the soldier, that moment was a release from years of burden. He felt the weight of ghosts lift as if the universe had finally given him permission to breathe. For her, it was triumph and peace intertwined, the culmination of a journey she had never doubted. Together they stepped into a future that no one could predict, but they stepped into it side by side, bound not by circumstance but by choice. In the years that followed, their story spread beyond their settlement. Tales traveled faster than ships, carried by traders, soldiers, and wanderers. The story of a human soldier and an alien woman bound by a childhood promise became legend, a tale told in camps and homes as proof that trust could survive war. Children grew up hearing it as a reminder that even in the darkest times, there could be light. Some dismissed it as romantic folly, but for many it became a symbol of what the galaxy could become if it chose hope over fear. He found a new role beyond soldiering. Though he remained marked by war, he became a teacher of peace, speaking to young recruits and diplomats alike about the importance of keeping one's word, about the strength found not in weapons but in compassion. She stood beside him, her presence living proof of those truths. Together they became something rare in the galaxy, not heroes of conquest, but heroes of connection. And though they never sought fame, they could not escape it, because their very existence challenged the old ways of thinking. At times, when nights grew quiet and he found himself staring at the stars, he thought back to the child who had sat beside him on a fence under a crimson sky. He remembered the innocence in her voice, the stubborn certainty that had startled him, the small hand gripping his armor as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He realized then that she had never truly changed. The woman who stood at his side now was the same soul who had once declared she would marry him. Only the years had filled in the strength to make that vow real. And he, for all his scars and doubts, had been waiting all along. The galaxy, vast and cold, often tried to reduce life to politics, power, and survival. But their story resisted that reduction. It was not about treaties or weapons. It was about two beings who found each other in chaos and chose to believe in a bond that defied reason. It was about humanity's unique gift to create meaning where none should exist, to turn despair into hope, to turn strangers into family. Their marriage was not merely personal. It was a declaration that the universe could be more than endless war. He sometimes joked with her that he had never truly agreed to the promise when she first made it, that she had tricked him with her insistence. She always laughed, her eyes shimmering, and reminded him that he had placed his hand over his heart and said he would remember. That had been enough. And he did remember, through every battle and every loss, until the day she returned to claim the vow. In that exchange lay the truth. He had never been tricked. He had been chosen, and in turn, he chose her. As years passed and peace slowly settled into the scars of the galaxy, they built a life that was not perfect but was real. They argued, they laughed, they faced the small struggles of daily life, and in those ordinary moments they found joy greater than any victory. Their love was not a fairy tale. It was stronger for being forged in hardship, tested by time, and grounded in the simple act of keeping one's word. To those who asked how they had managed it, they gave the same answer, by remembering that promises matter. In the twilight of his life, when gray had overtaken his hair and his steps had slowed, he still found her waiting beside him with the same unwavering gaze. When he looked back, he did not see endless wars or broken worlds. He saw a girl waving goodbye as his transport lifted, a woman striding through crowds to remind him of vow, a partner who had turned his survival into life. And when he closed his eyes for the last time, her hand in his, he carried with him a knowledge that humanity's truest victory was not in outlasting enemies, but in keeping faith with friends. The story of the little alien girl who told a human soldier she would marry him, and who kept that word at 21, lived long after they were gone. It became part of the galaxy's shared memory, proof that even in the vast cold of space, warmth could endure. The war stretched on like an endless storm, dragging the soldier from one corner of the galaxy to another. Each campaign blurred into the next, and with every world scarred by battle, he felt pieces of himself erode. Yet through the smoke and fire, one memory endured, small but unshakable. The voice of a girl with silver hair, declaring a vow as if her words could rewrite the universe. That promise lingered, not as a fantasy, but as a thread of meaning woven through the chaos. It gave him strength when exhaustion gnawed at his bones, when despair whispered that none of this mattered. It reminded him there had once been innocence worth protecting. His comrades noticed the way he carried himself differently. Where others fell into despair, he clung to something unseen. They assumed it was discipline or sheer stubbornness, hallmarks of humanity's resilience. But it was neither. It was a memory of a child's trust, the conviction that somewhere out there lived a being who believed in him without condition. When blood and ash threatened to drown him, that belief lifted him. Humanity was called fragile by the older species, yet fragility could hide iron, and in the heart of one man, a promise became stronger than any order. The years turned him harder, but not heartless. He learned to endure the silence after battles when names were read aloud and fewer voices answered the roll. He bore scars that ached under armor, wounds patched too many times. He aged faster than he should have, the weight of endless campaigns carving lines into his face. Still, he pressed forward, haunted by the echo of words spoken long ago. When I'm old enough, I'll marry you. They seemed absurd, yet they lived in him like a secret oath. In every siege, in every retreat, in every victory paid for with blood, he clung to the knowledge that at least once, someone had seen more than a weapon in him. Someone had seen a man worth remembering. The war shifted, tides turning slowly toward peace. Empires once proud staggered under the cost of endless campaigns. Treaties were whispered, then debated, then forged, as exhausted species sought reprieve. Humanity endured not because it was the strongest, but because it refused to break. Other civilizations looked at them with disbelief. How could such a young, fragile race outlast those who had ruled for millennia? The answer was simple and profound. Humans fought not for conquest, but for connection. They fought because promises mattered, because they could not bear to abandon those who trusted them. In this, the soldier embodied his people. He was not remarkable in skill compared to others, but he carried a vow that refused to die, and that made him extraordinary. Time did not erase her, though he told himself she must have forgotten. He imagined her growing, no longer a child but a woman with her own choices. He pictured her walking under alien skies, silver hair catching the light, eyes filled with the same luminous certainty. Sometimes he doubted she still thought of him, yet he never allowed himself to forget. In the quiet after battle, he returned again and again to memory of her voice, her hand gripping his gauntlet, her stubborn promise. In a galaxy bent on breaking spirits, remembering became his act of defiance. What he did not know was that across the void, she had grown in the shadow of that vow. Her people saw her fixation on humans as strange, even troubling, but she held to it with unwavering resolve. While others rebuilt, she studied. While others turned from the past, she looked toward the future she had declared for herself. She learned human words, read what little she could find of their histories, and carried the image of a soldier who had once lifted her from rubble. Her childhood promise was not something to discard. It was a compass. At 21, she could no longer be dismissed as a child dreaming foolishly. She had become a woman forged by determination, her people unable to sway her from the path she had chosen. When the guns finally fell silent and soldiers were scattered to maintain fragile truces, he found himself stationed in a sector far from glory, watching borders where distrust still lingered. He thought often that his life would end here in obscurity, his years of service dissolving into forgotten records. Then, one day, among a crowd of civilians petitioning the soldiers, he saw her. At first he thought fatigue had conjured a ghost, but ghosts did not walk with such certainty. Her silver hair glinted as it had in his memory, though now it framed the face of a woman. Her eyes met his with recognition, and his heart stuttered in disbelief. She approached him as though no years had passed. Her first words cut through time. "I told you I would find you." He stood speechless, a man who had faced countless battles, undone by the weight of a promise fulfilled. The child he had once comforted was gone. Before him stood a woman who had crossed years and worlds to honor her vow. In that moment, all the pain, all the scars, all the exhaustion of a lifetime of war fell away. What remained was the simple truth that some promises were stronger than time, stronger than war, stronger even than doubt. And as he reached out to her, he realized he had been waiting for this moment all along. The silence after war was never truly silent. For the soldier, it was filled with echoes of screams, the crash of artillery, the heavy silence of names never answered again. He thought peace would bring rest, but instead it left him with space for memories too sharp to ignore. Yet when she returned into his life with her vow alive and unbroken, the silence shifted. It was no longer a void but a canvas where something new could be drawn. He struggled to believe it at first, to accept that joy could follow years of sorrow. But her presence left him no choice. She had promised, and promises carried weight. Humanity had always been underestimated. Yet in her act of devotion, she revealed that humanity's true gift to the stars was not its weapons, but its ability to inspire loyalty across divides. Their union was not celebrated by all. Whispers carried through settlements, questioning, mocking, doubting. Some called it scandal, others a curiosity. Yet neither of them bent under the weight of scrutiny. She had chosen him with the same certainty she had shown as a child, and he accepted her not as a dream, but as reality. Together, they built something fragile but unyielding. They learned each other's rhythms anew, not as protector and child, but as equals bound by choice. He discovered that despite the years of loss, he could still laugh, still hope, still dream. She showed him that scars did not mean an end, but proof that he had survived. The galaxy, weary from endless conflict, found itself watching. Leaders and generals argued about treaties, but ordinary people clung to stories, and they're spread like wildfire. A soldier scarred by war and an alien woman bound by a vow became a symbol whispered in marketplaces, told in barracks, retold by those who longed for proof that peace was not only possible but already growing. Where officials saw a distraction, others saw a light. The soldier came to realize that their bond was no longer only theirs. It had become an idea, one that carried weight among soldiers who had lost hope, among civilians who had lost trust, among children who longed for a world where promises were kept. Still, building a life was harder than surviving war. He carried nightmares, guilt, and the crushing sense that he was unworthy of her faith. At times he pushed her away, convinced she would see the brokenness within him and regret her vow, but she never wavered. She reminded him that love was not about perfection, but about staying when it was easier to leave. In her steadfastness, he found strength. Slowly, the shadows of war receded, not erased but quieted by the life they were shaping together. For the first time in years, he believed he could belong to something beyond duty. Their story rippled outward. Veterans from every side found comfort in it, proof that even across species, there was healing. Children grew up hearing it as a tale of resilience, that a promise made in innocence could outlast cruelty. Even politicians grudgingly acknowledged its power, seeing in their bond a chance to bridge distrust between peoples who had once been enemies. The soldier and the woman did not seek to be symbols, but they became one nonetheless. Humanity's mark on the stars, once thought to be war and fire, revealed itself instead as connection and loyalty. As the years passed, he no longer counted battles but seasons. He grew older, his hair graying, his body slower, but she remained his anchor. Together they carved out a place of belonging, a home built not on conquest but on choice. When doubts crept in, he remembered the girl who had once clung to him in a ruined world, declaring with childish certainty a vow that now defined their lives. When he looked into her eyes, he saw not just a devotion, but a reflection of what humanity could be at its best: resilient, faithful, capable of inspiring hope across impossible distances. At last, when he thought of the future, it was not with dread, but with quiet faith. He had lived long enough to see war fade and love endure. He understood then that HFY was not about dominance or power. It was about this: the ability to give meaning where none should exist, to create bonds that defy despair, to turn fleeting words into unbreakable truths. She had once told him she would marry him when she was old enough, and at 21 she kept her word. But more than that, she taught him that humanity's greatest legacy was not survival alone, but the promises that could outlast galaxies. And as they stood together, scarred yet unbroken, they were not only proof of love's endurance, but humanity's place among the stars. The years that followed were unlike anything the soldier could have imagined during the long nights of war. Where once he measured time in battles and losses, now he counted it in days of peace, in shared laughter, in the steady rhythm of building a life beside the woman who had kept her word. Yet peace, though gentler than war, was never simple. Their union was a promise fulfilled, but it was also a challenge cast before two civilizations still healing from wounds not yet closed. He soon realized that their love was no longer merely theirs. It had become a mirror in which entire peoples searched for meaning, for proof that trust could be rebuilt after centuries of bloodshed. And so, as much as he tried to live quietly, the galaxy continued to watch. Backslash and backslash in stories of them spread farther than either had intended. Traders carried the tale from port to port. Soldiers told in the barracks when nights grew too long, and civilians repeated it as proof that promises were not illusions but anchors. Children grew up hearing that a vow once spoken in innocence had survived war and distance, and they looked at humans not as conquerors, but as partners capable of loyalty beyond reason. This shift unsettled those who profited from distrust, but it planted seeds in places they could not reach. The soldier and the woman never sought to be legends, but slowly they became symbols of something larger than themselves. Symbols were powerful, and in a galaxy weary of fear, they were dangerous too. Backslash and backslash end with symbolism came scrutiny. Delegations arrived at their home, eager to use their story as leverage in fragile negotiations. Some pleaded for them to speak publicly, to lend their bond as evidence that peace was sustainable. Others warned that their love blurred lines that should remain unbroken. They endured endless questions, from the intimate to the political, and he often bristled at the intrusion. Yet she reminded him that promises, once spoken, carried responsibility. If their lives could inspire even a fraction of peace, then their burden was worth carrying. And so they became reluctant ambassadors, not through speeches, but by living honestly, by standing beside each other even when doubts circle like vultures. And he discovered that the hardest battles were no longer fought with rifles, but with patience, trust, and the courage to forgive, in negotiations between their peoples. Centuries of resentment erupted in harsh words, but when he stood beside her, the weight of hostility sometimes softened. The sight of them together reminded the most jaded leaders that there was another path, however difficult. It did not erase old wounds, but it offered the faintest glimmer of what healing might look like. That glimmer was enough to keep peace alive when it might otherwise have collapsed. Neen Private. Their life was not without struggle. He carried scars of nightmares that woke him sweating in the dark. She carried the burden of knowing her choice defied expectations, sometimes estranging her from her own people. Yet they learned again and again that love was not the absence of hardship, but the decision to face it together. He had thought himself too broken to deserve her, but with each day she stayed, he realized that brokenness did not mean unworthy. Her steadfastness became the salve that allowed him to begin forgiving himself for surviving when so many others had not. And in turn, his quiet devotion proved to her people that her vow had not been a foolish whim, but a truth deeper than bloodlines. And his years became decades. Their story grew into something greater than either of them. New generations rose who had never known war, yet they carried the memory of promises fulfilled as part of their heritage. Mixed families began to appear in small numbers, tentative bridges between species once sworn to destroy each other. Every such bond was fragile, often tested. But the knowledge that one soldier and one woman had succeeded gave others the courage to try. Cultural exchanges flourished, at first as experiments, later as natural growth. Humanity was no longer seen only as relentless survivors, but as bearers of faith that could ignite devotion beyond barriers. He lived long enough to see monuments raised not to generals or battles, but a peace accord signed under banners that bore their likeness. It embarrassed him, for he had never sought such recognition. But when he saw children running at the base of those statues, laughing freely without fear of war, he accepted the honor quietly. For him, the true monument was not carved in stone, but written in the lives of those who now live without the shadow of constant conflict. She, wiser than him in some ways, reminded him that symbols were not for the honored, but for those who needed hope. If their likeness gave even one child faith in the future, then it was worth enduring the weight of legend. Nina's twilight years. He sat often in quiet of their home, watching her as she moved with the same grace she had always possessed. Though age touched him more quickly than her, she never left his side. He would sometimes ask why she had held on to her vow through so much, why she had not chosen an easier path. Her answer never changed, because love was not about ease, but about truth, and she had seen her truth the day he lifted her from the rubble and spoke to her with kindness. He came to understand then that what made humanity truly remarkable was not its strength or its intellect, but its ability to awaken faith in others. That was a legacy he would leave, not battles fought, but a promise kept. When at last his body grew too weary to continue, he did not fear the end. He had lived to see peace blossom, had known love that spanned stars, had watched his people and hers begin to weave a shared future. As he lay in her arms one final time, he whispered that her vow had saved him more than once, that had been the thread that kept him alive when he might otherwise have surrendered. She held him and answered with the same quiet certainty she had carried all her life, that promises were not chains but wings. He smiled at that, closed his eyes, and slipped into rest. And she mourned him, but she did not retreat into silence. Instead, she carried his story forward, speaking to new generations about the power of loyalty, of choosing to believe even when the galaxy told you to despair. She told them that a little alien girl once promised a soldier she would marry him when she was old enough, and that at 21 she had kept her word. In her telling, it was not only a love story but a lesson in humanity's essence, that fragile beings from a small world could ignite devotion so fierce it bridged civilizations. Her words lit a fire in countless hearts, ensuring that their bond would never fade into dust, but remain as proof that even in the vastness of space, promises mattered. And centuries later, when their names had passed into legend, scholars and poets still debated their legacy. Some claimed they were myth, a tale too perfect to be real. Others swore the records were true, pointing to treaties and monuments as evidence. But for the common people, the truth of the story mattered less than the hope it inspired. They told it again and again, across worlds and generations, because it reminded them that humanity was not defined by destruction, but by the ability to keep faith across impossible divides. In the end, that was a soldier's final gift of stars, not the battles he fought, but the promise he inspired and the love that outlasted war itself.